Okay, so welcome to Botany and Bugs. Today we're going to be focusing a lot on botany, and great news for those of you who have been here the entire time. You don't have to listen to me exclusively speak for the next however long. So this is my friend Vikram Baliga. He is a professor over at Texas Tech. Is that correct, right? I'll let him give himself a better intro, but he's going to be talking to us about botany today.
All right. Well, thanks. I was excited to get to do this today. I'm always happy to pretty much do whatever Sufyan asks me to do in general. And obviously, I'm always happy to talk about plants. So this should be a lot of fun. I kind of, and I'll share, I've got a PowerPoint I'll share in just a second.
Let me see if I can turn you to see the class. Oh, shoot. Okay, sorry. We're dealing with a little funky connector. Okay. I won't touch anything else.
Good, cool. Okay. So I was trying to think of how I wanted to approach this, because I know you all have been talking about community ecology and ecosystems and conservation and those kinds of things. So I thought I would go a couple of different ways with this lecture, and I'm happy to answer questions and happy to discuss however, but we're going to talk about just a couple of very basic botany concepts, mostly about what plants need to grow, as well as how plants grow. And that'll make more sense here in just a minute. And then what I wanted to talk about is the way that plants sort of interact in sort of non-native environments. I'm, for the purpose of making this easy, calling them urban environments, but this could really relate to any sort of artificial landscape, any non-natural ecosystem. And so we'll go through a couple of different things. And so we're going to talk about the basics of botany. We're going to talk about some of the unique challenges in urban and residential and city and town ecosystems. And then we're going to talk about multi-purpose landscapes and the way that conservative, thoughtful, multi-purpose landscape design and ecological design can help solve some of our problems that we face in just in horticulture and in botany and in urban environments in general. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my PowerPoint. Let's see. Okay, can you all see it? Can everyone see it?
Yes.
We're good? Okay, great. So again, I am a assistant professor of horticulture here in Texas at Texas Tech University. I also run our greenhouse and horticultural gardens on campus. So we have a teaching greenhouse and garden, and we teach 1,500 students out there a year, plus thousands of members of the public. And so some of the things that I think I will be talking about today kind of come from this idea of recreating natural systems and strong, meaningful, powerful ecosystems in urban environments or in sort of, again, artificial landscapes. Most of my background is in either conservation or landscape design. So my undergrad, I studied landscape design and horticulture. And then my master's, I studied water conservation in olive orchards. And then my PhD was urban water, landscape water conservation. And then since then, I've been working a lot in community horticulture, community gardens, and sort of more sustainable and different methods of agriculture and food production, as well as aesthetics. So one thing I want to throw out there before we get started, and I think this is important to, think about as we think about a lot of these botany concepts, is that every landscape is an artificial landscape. And by definition, that means that it does not behave in the same way that a native ecosystem would. I'm very much a proponent of native plants and not just native, but well-adapted non-invasive introduced plants as well. But if you take a plant out of its natural ecosystem where it's growing in a specific type of soil, a specific amount of water and sunlight and wind and all the things that make up an ecosystem, and you dig it up and you put it in your front yard, it is not going to perform the same way. We can take a lot of steps to get closer to that native environment. And it is good, I think, to sort of try to match our urban landscapes, our urban ecosystems to the native areas in which they live. But there are always going to be differences in the way that a plant responds to stress, to insects, to drought, to all these different things in an urban environment or in a home environment than in a native, like a true native environment. And so when we talk about native landscaping, I think we kind of have to keep that in mind, that just because something works in one location doesn't mean it'll necessarily work even in a very, very slightly different location. And so when we talk about how to design a landscape, it actually gives us more options. And a larger palette of plants we can use, and new tips and techniques and tricks and things that we can use to make our landscapes more beautiful and more efficient and more ecologically friendly. So we're going to start off talking about some of the very basics of botany. Okay. And I went back and forth on this for a while because it's like, oh, how much down in the weeds do I want to get on this? Because we could talk about very specific things that I make my students learn. Or we can talk about some of the higher level things that a plant needs to grow. And a lot of this will be review, I think, for a lot of folks. But I think it is also important to reiterate this because, again, this applies to how we use plants in the urban landscape or the home landscape. So what are the things a plant needs? I think from the time we're in kindergarten, we kind of learn that there's three main things, right? That a plant needs sunlight, a plant needs soil, and a plant needs water. And all of those things are true. But there's more than that as well. So the first thing is we need adequate space and growing medium. And I say growing media because when we start thinking about places that plants grow that are not just out in a field somewhere, it kind of expands the things that we use to grow plants. So this could be soil, which soil is sort of the collection of sand, silt, clay, decomposed rock, all these things that exist out in nature. So if you go out and you dig a hole in a field, the stuff that you dig up is soil, right? It is mostly minerals. It's 95% minerals and rock in different stages of erosion. And then 5% or so organic matter, like decomposing leaves and other stuff, compost. But there's other things we grow plants in, right? We can grow plants in potting media, which if you go buy a potting soil at the garden center, most of the time these are what we consider soilless potting medias. They have things like bark and peat moss and sphagnum and coconut coir and wood chips and all of these different things that make them up. But generally, there's not really any true soil in there. You may get a little bit of sand, but really that's the only mineral particle that's going to be in there. So we call these soilless potting medias. They tend to be well drained. They tend to have more nutrients in them, and they tend to be much lighter than a field soil. So in my greenhouse, when we grow plants, we're not going outside generally and digging up stuff from the horticultural garden and putting it in a pot and then using that soil inside because it's really heavy. We bring insects in, we bring pathogens in. So we use sort of a clean potting media. We can grow plants in water. Hydroponics is a whole thing now. And not now, it has been for a long time. Native peoples of the Central Americas have been doing forms of hydroponics and growing plants on rafts and in water since about 1000 to 1100 ACE. There's evidence that it was done in different parts of the world even before that. So it's not a new technique. It's just something that's becoming popular, and we're using more technology in it now. We can hang plants from the ceiling. Aeroponics is a new version of hydroponics, which we'll talk about a little bit here in a second. And it's another way that we can use just the air, just the environment around the roots of a plant to grow plants. Plants need water. But they also need good quality water. They need adequate water. They need it kind of weirdly at the right temperature. And there's a lot that goes into proper irrigation of your plants. Plants need sunlight. But not all sunlight is created equal. For example, here in Lubbock, Texas, where I live, this time of year, we get about 15 hours of sunlight. And it was 107 degrees on Saturday. Plants don't love that. And so when we say like full sun, if a plant is full sun, that means like 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight, right? So if you notice that your full sun plant is just like sitting out in your yard and catching on fire, it's probably because we're taking full sun a little too literally and just leaving it out to its own devices all day. Now, in a native setting, in a field setting, a wildflower, a plant that is well adapted, can usually take that however many hours of sunlight we throw at it. But like your tomatoes are not going to be real happy if it's 107 degrees outside. I know mine aren't. They're just quitting on me. And we're all waiting for fall at this point. We need an appropriate environment. We need the right temperature. We need the right amount of shade and wind and all the things that sort of fit into an environment. We need the right amount of nutrients. And I put positive affirmation in here as a joke because about once a month, someone sends me an article saying, hey, have you read this study where if you talk nice to your plants, they'll do better? I have. About once a month, I get this article and I read this article, but thinking nice things about your plants probably makes you take better care of them. The plants themselves don't really care if you play like loud rock music at them, or if you, yell verbal abuse at them, or if you call them nice, beautiful plants and, tuck them in every night. They don't care so much. It probably affects you more than it affects the plants. So here's a plant growing in soil, right? It is outside in a field. You have either planted a seed or transplanted a plant out there. There's a lot of advantages botanically to growing in soil. The roots tend to be protected better. Soil does a really great job of buffering against chemical change as well as temperature change. So if you're growing a plant out in the soil, typically it's going to be a little less susceptible to big temperature swings, either cooler, warmer, whatever. Good soils tend to retain moisture well. They tend to have the nutrients that a plant needs at some level. And plants in soil, have been growing in soil for millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. So this is sort of the gold standard, right? You go outside, you dig a hole, you put a seed in it, the seed comes up, and you have a plant growing in soil. But again, that's not always practical if you're trying to grow plants inside. So you may use something like a soilless potting media. Now, again, these are going to retain moisture pretty well in general. They're going to have good nutrients in them in general, and they're good to grow plants. However, if you go and you stick them outside and it's hot all the time and it's windy all the time, they're going to dry down fairly quickly. They don't have that same buffering capacity that a true, real field soil might. Here's an example of hydroponic tomato production. Okay, so these plants are growing in some kind of grow bags. They probably have something called rock wool, which is sort of like it's essentially spun rock that feels like wool. It retains a ton of moisture. The roots can grow through it easily. But when we think about food production now and growing plants in greenhouse environments, this is a major deal. Worldwide, we are growing a lot of our food supply hydroponically. Now, not all of it, probably not even 20% of it. When we think of, 5, 10, 15% of our food supply coming out of a greenhouse, that's pretty substantial, right? That is a lot of calories a day per person. People will talk quite a bit about how, hothouse hydroponically grown tomatoes don't taste as good. Well, maybe when we first started producing them, that was true. But now we've learned a lot. And we can add the nutrients necessary. We can adjust the environment in such a way that we can make hydroponic tomatoes taste coming off the plant just the same as they would coming off a plant that's grown in someone's backyard. I didn't use the picture in here because I wanted to show more of a large-scale production setting. But you can grow tomatoes in an environment like this for incredibly long periods of time, right? Normally we think about tomatoes as you plant them in the spring, they live for a while. It gets kind of cold and then they turn to mush in a hurry. But they grow tomato plants in some of these hydroponic production systems that live for 18 to 24 months. And they'll harvest 800 or 900 pounds of tomatoes off a single plant in some of these large production settings. So hydroponics is cool in a lot of ways, but a big thing is that we can use, say, abandoned shopping malls or warehouses or apartment buildings or, a basement at Disney World somewhere to grow tomatoes and lettuce and things. And I say Disney World because this is a picture from Epcot at Disney World of something called Living with the Land. Disney doesn't do anything halfway, so you can take a boat ride through their hydroponic and aeroponic growing facility. You actually can see there's people on a boat back here. But these are Brussels sprouts being grown in an aeroponic production facility. So they're on a conveyor belt, and they go through this trough right here where high-pressure nozzles spray water and nutrients onto the roots of the plant. So they'll spend, 90 seconds going through here, and then they'll spend 5 minutes just hanging in the air with the roots suspended in the air, sort of drying out. And then they go back through. And they can produce 5-10 times as much per plant in a system like this than you could growing in soil. So the point I'm trying to make is that this is where botany is starting to meet our technology. We can take these concepts that work because plants have been doing this for, again, hundreds of millions of years, really without our intervention. And we can start to adjust our practices, and we can apply those principles and these biological principles to our technological systems, and we can get more food and more production out of less space and less resources, which, as our population grows, as climate change does all kinds of weird things to the environment, things like this are going to become more important, and taking advantage of sort of the botanical flexibility of plants and the wide variety of places they can grow is becoming more important. So those are some of the basic things plants need to grow. Again, they need water, sunlight, something to grow in, nutrients, and just really a good environment. But let's talk a little bit about how plants grow. And I hope I can explain this well, because there are a lot of misconceptions about how plants grow. So I was watching a TV show one time, and they were like trying to solve a crime, like someone had been shot or something on the show, and they were looking for the bullet like that was part of this crime. And so they were like, oh, it went through this window and it's stuck in this tree. And they were like, oh, but the shooting was like 10 or 20 years ago. So now it's not here, it's way up there. And so they got a ladder and they climbed up in the tree and they found the bullet 30 feet higher in the air and they solved the crime. Hooray. Except that's not how trees grow. That's not how plants grow. If you were to go out and carve your name and carve a heart or whatever into the trunk of a tree, or put a nail in a tree, it would be in that exact point in space as long as that tree was standing there. Okay, so damage that or any kind of things that like affect the trunk of a tree are permanent in that point in space. So there's not like a whole bunch of tree underground that's getting pushed up in the air. It doesn't grow from the base of the tree upwards. Trees and plants in general grow out this way, and they get larger in diameter from the outside of the stem, and they grow out from the tips. So they grow up and out this way. So what we're looking at here is sort of the, in this picture, the life of a tree and the things you can tell from a cross-section of a tree. So A, here in this top left picture, corresponds to the very center of this tree ring, the very, very middle tree ring. As that tree germinates and grows as a sapling, as a seedling, that's your very, very center ring. And then each year that tree grows, it lays in more wood out in concentric circles. So like if you start in the middle and count all the way out to the outside ring, you can tell about how long a tree has been alive. Each one of those rings is that trunk expanding in diameter and adding more wood. Okay. And then, so like if we look at letter C here, what this is showing is that wind was blowing in a specific direction, right? This tree's leaning. So the center of a tree is usually not in the center. It's usually offset, because a tree is going to react to forces like wind or gravity or whatever else and put more wood on the opposite side. So if you see a whole bunch of wood from the or more wood on the north side of a tree, as you look at a cross section, you can guess that the prevailing wind came out of the south, and that force was always applied to the south side of that tree because that tree was putting on more wood on the north side to help it stand up and help it resist that force. Okay. We'll skip through to F and say a forest fire came through and charred some of the bark of that tree or charred some of the wood on that tree. You would see essentially like a scorch mark in that tree's sort of historical record as you looked at the cross section. So you can tell a lot about the environment but just based on how a tree grows and based on its rings. So like a really wide band is probably a wet, really good year, right? The environment is appropriate for that plant growth. A really, really narrow band is probably a hot drought year where that tree didn't grow as much. Okay, so that's a tree or a plant expanding in diameter, right? Your tomato's not going to do this. You're not going to get tree rings in your tomato, but it still grows in the same way. It has that growing point on the outside of its stem, and it gets wider and wider as the season goes on. But then a tree also grows out from the tips. So at the end of every stem, we have something called a terminal bud or an apical bud. And this is the main point of stem elongation. So as that tree grows, it's adding length from the tips of the stems outwards. That's why we don't want to go out and like top our trees, right? If you come in and you cut off these growing points, there's nothing to elongate that stem. And you get weird growth things. You'll get lots of these secondary buds growing, and it gets bushier. But it doesn't grow in the way that sort of botanically it's supposed to. So we want to be careful when pruning that we're not removing too many of these growing points unless we're doing it for a reason, right? If you say have a hedge in your front yard and you want it to be more full and more dense, well, you come in and you take off all those terminal buds, and it'll cause those branches to, well, branch. And the lateral buds that are down the stem will start growing because that terminal bud's gone. And then you can get a more dense sort of full plant that way. So in general, a plant doesn't really, I'm going to say the word want, even though a plant doesn't really like want things or not want things. It just responds to the environment. But ideally, those terminal buds would keep growing. It would help that plant compete for sunlight against the plants around it, and everyone's happy. The plant goes on with its day. But then we put it in our front yard, and we don't want it to go through the window of our car or into our roof. And so we have to prune selectively, but we prune based on the biology of the plant as much as we can. So again, that is a very couple of quick things about how plants grow and what they need to grow. But it directly relates to how we use them in the landscape and how we use them in urban environments. So this, by the way, is not Lubbock, Texas. We are flat and dry. It's so flat here you can watch your dog run away for 2 days. And if you look real hard, you can see the back of your own head. And we're a fairly urban environment. We have about 300,000 people here, but it's not like this. So I believe Missoula is probably not pictured here either. But some of the things that would apply in a big city like this still apply in any town or any city. Some of the challenges we face with our plants and with our ecology and with the botany of our plants are kind of the same, regardless if you're in New York or Chicago or Lubbock, Texas, or anywhere else. Okay, so I'm using the term urban pretty loosely here. But urban ecosystems are these complex webs of plants, animals, people, and environment. And because they are artificial, sometimes we have to be very thoughtful in the way we approach plant growth and the things we plant and the way we manage our environment. Okay, they're usually combinations of some kind of green spaces and hardscapes. So hardscape is anything that water doesn't want to go through, right? Concrete, roofs, sidewalks, drainage tiles, anything else. That's all hardscape. And then we have green spaces like parks and medians and rights of way and things like that. And all of these things together kind of make our urban ecosystems. Okay, we have large populations, we have pollution, we have a lot of challenges, but we also have a lot of opportunity, even in our modern urban environments, to be more ecologically conscious and to be more conservation minded in general. One way to do this that I am sort of especially interested in is multi-purpose landscapes. Okay, this is a cool, though incomplete, solution to a lot of things in an urban environment. Now, I like to make the point that it is incomplete because we don't have any single solutions to things like pollution or hunger or climate change or pollinator loss or any of the challenges we face. None of this exists in a vacuum. And it would be really great if I could say, oh, this is the one tool, the one trick that we can use to overcome our challenges. But ecology and our environment are complicated. And they're necessarily complicated. They're complicated because they add checks and balances into the system. They add resilience to the system. And so when we approach all of these challenges, conservation, food insecurity, economic insecurity, habitats for pollinators, the heat island effect from a city, runoff, all of these other things, pollution, we can't just look for one solution. We have to use sort of all of the tools in our toolbox to come up with complex solutions for complex systems. Okay, but we'll talk about multi-purpose landscapes because I think they're cool. And I was told I could talk about whatever I want, so this is what you get from me. I do this to my students too, by the way. I'll be lecturing on something and I'll tell them a story and they'll be like, "What? Why did you tell us that?" Like, because I thought it was cool, and you're a captive audience, so that's how lecturing works. So what is a multi-purpose landscape? Okay, landscapes that address multiple needs are becoming increasingly popular. I say on everyone's minds. Eco-friendly landscapes are probably not on everyone's minds. But if you're sitting in this room listening to me talk, it's probably on your mind at least a little bit. Being more environmentally friendly is probably something that you have some consideration for, right? It's something that I think about a lot when I design my own landscape and when I put plants in my garden and when my son and I grow vegetables or whatever else we grow, right? We're trying to be as environmentally friendly as possible. In addition to that, a lot of homeowners are taking advantage of local food markets for extra income. So whether that's farmers markets or direct to consumer kind of things, selling to restaurants, whatever else, people are making a little extra money by growing food in their yards. I know I was on the board for one of our local farmers markets for a couple of years, and we had this wide range of people that grew 100 square feet of tomatoes in their backyard, and they would come and sell them at market because they wanted to buy an Xbox. I don't know. And then we had people that would have 5 or 10 acres of land, and that was their main source of income. There was one young man that came to one of our conferences one time, and he came with his dad. And I was like, we used to do this small farm and local foods conference here in Lubbock. And this kid comes with his dad. He's probably 14 years old. And I was like, oh, how nice. This farmer brought his son with him to the conference. Turns out the kid was the farmer and the dad was just his ride. His dad had told him, well, he wanted a truck. This kid's name is Ethan. He actually just graduated from our program at Texas Tech. So he wanted a truck when he turned 16. And his dad told him, well, okay, but you have to pay for it. So he said, okay. And he started planting vegetables in his backyard and selling them at a farmer's market. And then he rented out his neighbor's backyard and then another neighbor's backyard. And he actually recently just bought the house next to his parents' house so that his grandma could live in it and he could use the backyard to grow more vegetables. He sells at 3 farmers markets now, is in several grocery stores, and supplies about half the restaurants in my city. He's 22 years old, and I don't know why he went, through our program. He didn't need us. He could have taught half the classes. But things like that are really like viable ways that people can make some extra money or make a lot of extra money in some cases. And then efficiency is becoming sort of a popular design ethic in landscaping. Creating space for wildlife and pollinators is becoming more important. But if we're landscaping, we want to make sure we're maintaining aesthetic value and appeal. In the home landscape, it should enhance your property value. It should make your home more valuable, both in a monetary sense and in a sort of personal well-being, quality of life sense. You should go outside and like looking at your landscape instead of walking out your back door and sitting on your back porch and just seeing chores that you need to do. Okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the American Society of Landscape Architects does a survey every year of I think they have about 1,000 companies that are part of the organization, of what these companies' clients want in a landscape. And the top 3 or 4, so let's go through the top 5. And this has been consistent for the past, I believe, 6 years, are native plants, low maintenance landscapes, which are probably not really a thing, rain gardens, food and vegetable gardens, and then water-saving xeriscape or dry gardens. So out of 1,000 firms across the U.S., tens of thousands of clients, these 5 things are what people want most in their landscapes these days. So sort of the ethics of urban landscapes is starting to change. It could probably change a little bit faster than it is, but in a lot of places nationwide, people are more interested in being environmentally friendly. And also using the landscape as an outdoor living space, not just something that you walk through to, take the garbage out or get to your car or, go to the sidewalk, but an extension of your home. And it doesn't have to be quite as, bougie as this. It can be a lawn chair in your backyard where you sit under a tree and listen to the birds or watch the squirrels, or somewhere where you go and cut flowers to put in your kitchen or whatever. Like, it should be an extension of your home. And turns out when we do things like that, we tend to put more emphasis on the spaces in which we exist. So if we are spending more time in our gardens and our landscapes, just psychologically, we want to make them better, and we want to make them more efficient. We want to make them easier to care for, and we want to make them prettier. Another way to go about this is using edible plants in the landscape as landscape elements. So you don't have to be this kid Ethan who takes over the entire neighborhood and builds a small farm empire in Lubbock, Texas. You can grow a few tomatoes. Peppers are pretty plants. You can use things like spinach and herbs and cabbage and kale, basil, strawberries. Eggplants have beautiful flowers. And use all of them as aesthetic plants in the landscape, and then you're getting multiple purposes out of the same space and the same resources. The one thing we're not getting any more of is land. In fact, the amount of land we have worldwide to grow plants is reducing sort of at an alarming rate. So the message I try to send is not don't have a landscape. It's be as efficient with the space you have as possible, right? Instead of just going out and instead of maybe going and buying an ornamental pear tree, which if you've seen any of the things I post on social media ever, like Bradford pears are my arch nemesis. It's weird to have a plant as an arch nemesis, but there's this ornamental pear tree called a Bradford pear. And I think the best way to prune them is horizontally 6 inches from the ground. You can replace those with a fruiting pear, right? Like it still flowers in the spring. It'll still turn colors in the fall. It looks pretty much the same, except you get pears from it, and it's not invasive, right? So why don't we use edible plants as design elements and sort of start replacing some of just the purely aesthetic plants that are going into the landscape? Not that those plants are bad. It's just how can we be more efficient in the same spaces? So if we are trying to grow extra food, whether for yourself or for your neighbors and your neighborhood or to sell at a farmer's market, you're using edible plants for their aesthetic value as well as their productive potential. At some point, you have to think of what your goals are in the landscape. Are you trying to have a garden you really, really love to look at? Are you trying to grow food or somewhere in between? And based on your goals, you have to manage the emotional connection to the plant material. And I say this because people will plant 10 tomato plants, 5 tomato plants, and one will get sick. It'll get a disease. It'll start wilting. It'll get bugs or whatever. And people will go and spend all of their time trying to save this one tomato plant, right? Because it's their friend now. We as humans will pack bond with literally anything. And so we'll spend all this time trying to save one plant when really you could be more successful in the landscape by pulling it out and replacing it. I have a little peach orchard. My family has a little peach orchard here in Lubbock. And I had to learn a long time ago that even though in the prairie where I live, cutting down a tree kind of feels like a crime, they're there for a purpose, right? They're there for a reason. So we try to use them accordingly. But we want to follow efficient design principles when we're designing a multi-purpose landscape, an edible landscape. So if you look through this, and I know it's kind of hard to see on this slide, but pretty much everything in this landscape is edible. And it's cool. It's modern. It's an interesting design. There's Swiss chard up here. There are alliums in the back, sage over here, a number of different colors and types and textures of lettuce. I think if I remember correctly, there's some kale and things back in the back. There's basil and peppers and a lot of different things that make this really an attractive landscape that also yields a ton of stuff. Like you can harvest a lot from this, okay? So things that'll make us more efficient in the landscape, grouping plants by their needs so that you're not overwatering something and underwatering another thing. I had a client one time when I was landscaping that when I got to their house had a bed that was half cactus and half tomatoes. that's a problem for like a lot of reasons. Like there's some thought issues and design issues there. One, if you're going to water your tomatoes enough, your cacti are going to turn into weird mushy water balloons and die. Right? They don't like that. Or if you're trying to supply the right amount of water to your cactus, your tomatoes are going to wilt and go away. Plus, if I'm harvesting tomatoes, I want to be as far away from the closest cactus as possible. Right? That's not good utilitarian space usage. So group plants by their needs, and you'll be a lot more efficient. Pick as water-wise plants as you can. Now, if we're growing vegetables, they are going to have a higher water requirement in general. But I want us to stop thinking about that as a waste of water. It is an efficient use of water. If you're applying an amount of water and you get aesthetic value out of it, plus you get something that will feed you or feed a pollinator or something else, you are using that water efficiently and wisely. You need manageable or no turf areas. Like turf grass is what it is. It serves its purpose, but it's not efficient, right? It's not the best part of an efficient design. So we want to minimize our turf grass areas, so our lawn areas. Efficient irrigation systems. This could be going out and watering with a hose or putting in drip lines and soaker hoses and things like that. Prepping the soil. So I tell people this all the time. Get a soil test. The Extension Service, or at least one university in most states, has a soil testing lab. So you go out and you dig like a 6-inch deep hole about the width of a trowel. And then in a given area, you'll do that about 10 times, just sort of randomly. Mix that soil together, let it dry, and then send off your soil sample to a testing lab. They'll tell you what nutrients are in it. They'll tell you the pH of the soil. They can tell you if there's any like residual herbicides or anything else in the soil. But that keeps you from either applying too many nutrients, like over-fertilizing, and it keeps you from under-fertilizing. You want to be meeting the needs of your plants. Okay, mulching. Use mulch. I will never try to talk someone out of mulching their landscape or their garden, whether it is straw or spent hay or bark mulch or anything else. It helps prevent weeds. It keeps the soil cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. It reduces water loss, and your plants are going to be much happier and healthier. And then proper maintenance. Make sure your plants are healthy. Make sure all of your, if you've got drip lines, make sure there's not holes in them, that squirrels haven't gotten after them. If you have sprinklers, make sure they're not spraying onto concrete or onto a wall. Let's make every drop of water we pump out of the ground or out of a lake count. It's not, don't spend the resource. It's spend the resource as wisely as possible. Okay. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go quick through the last of this. So here's some just garden design ideas. Now, this is not the most attractive garden, but it does have some interesting and important principles here. So in this one, the house is sort of on the lower end. Let me see if I can get a laser pointer on here. On the lower end of this garden, okay? So things that require more maintenance, that are more colorful, should be planted closer to the house. Things like colorful flowers or higher water requirement plants, things that are going to need more attention. The closer they are to your home, the more efficient they're going to be, because you'll spend the amount of time you need to take care of them. As you get farther away, things like raised beds or trellises or lower water use plants are really useful. Things that can take care of themselves a little bit more, or things that are going to require more space. Okay, put the more high needs, the needier plants close to your house, the things that are not going to block views that you want to look at every day, and the rest of the stuff you can sort of make decisions as it gets farther away from your back door. Here's another cool design. This has, I believe this is a pomegranate tree. Plus here's some sage, there's basil, there are herbs and all kinds of things. This isn't a botanical garden, but these types of very modern designs actually work great with multi-purpose landscapes. Just looking at some different pictures, this one's kind of cool. I love sunflowers. They are great forage for pollinators and birds and all kinds of other things. But you can also eat them, right? They serve as structure for squash or shade for your tomatoes or a lot of other things. So this is a good way to mix and match plants. You can have ornamentals down here in the front. There's some squash and some gourds farther back in this landscape. There's a grape over the arbor. And it's really a well done and nice multi-purpose landscape. We can use a lot of plants that have multiple purposes. This is rosemary. Culinary rosemary has pretty flowers in the spring. It is great early season and season-long forage for our pollinators, and we can use it as an herb in the landscape. And there are a lot of them that are not super cold tolerant, but they've bred rosemary that'll go down to like zone 3 or 4, so southern Canada. It'll take very cold conditions and come back the next year. This is a variety of strawberries that has like really pretty fuchsia pink flowers, and it also yields strawberries. Now, these are not the best tasting strawberries I've ever had, just being completely honest. But again, they serve a nice aesthetic function in the landscape. You can eat them. Birds like them. But also just a regular strawberry, like production strawberry, is really pretty, right? You have a nice white flower, you get a fruit off of it. It serves a couple of purposes, makes a great ground cover, actually. Strawberries are surprisingly tough. They're cold tolerant, they're heat tolerant. They are strong little plants. So here's another picture of that with a little fruit on it. This is the flower on an eggplant. It is a beautiful flower, and they actually get these large, like sort of dark green, luscious leaves. The fruit are interesting. They provide season-long interest in the landscape, but also, if you like eggplants, it's a great source of food. Here are tomato flowers. They look similar. They're in the same family. Sunflowers are great multi-purpose plants. You can, again, roast the seeds. They can be eaten in a lot of different ways. A lot of different parts of this plant can be used. But pollinators love them. They are huge. They produce a lot of nectar. So for bees, butterflies, and everything in between, they're important sources of forage through the season. And then the birds eat the seeds at the end of the season. This is a plant called Turkscap. It's in the mallow family, so it's in the same family as a hibiscus. It puts beautiful flowers on. It'll flower in the shade. It's pretty cold tolerant, and it puts on these little fruits that they're mostly seed. But you can eat them. You can make jam out of them. They kind of taste like they have a flavor similar to an apple, but they have sort of honey notes in them, and it's a mild flavor. But I like them. They're really pretty good. This is a variety of basil called balsamic blooms. This is a heck of a pollinator plant. Bees love basil flowers. And this is one that you can let it go to flower and let all these showy bracts come out, and it doesn't really ruin the flavor of the leaves. Some basils, especially some of the wild types, when they go to flower, the leaves get a little bitter. But a lot of the improved varieties don't do that as much. This is a sweet potato vine. So this is more of an ornamental variety, but it's a great ground cover. It does produce a sweet potato that is, in a very technical sense, edible. There's a difference, by the way, between edible and palatable. It won't hurt you, except maybe, in your heart. Because it doesn't taste good. But you can also get like production sweet potatoes, and they have beautiful bright green leaves, and they also make a great ground cover. This is asparagus. And I see at least one person out there going like, no, it's not. We harvest asparagus when it first comes out of the ground. And if you've ever been or seen an asparagus field, if you haven't, you should look it up, because it kind of looks like someone's trying to play a trick on you. Like they just took asparagus spears and stuck them in the ground and ran away. But that's how asparagus grows. We harvest the immature stalks. Once it completely grows out, it turns into this fern-like plant, puts on little red berries that are surprisingly poisonous, except to birds. Birds love it, and so it's a great forage for birds later, and you can harvest it and early season, or it makes sort of a nice filler for a bed or a border in your landscape. And, I think through all of this, we've talked a lot about, what do we do for, if you're going to sell lettuce or whatever else, but protecting our wildlife, whether it's bees or butterflies or mice and lizards and everything else that exists in an urban landscape is super important. So planting plants that they can take advantage of, that they can eat and survive off of as well, whether that's laying their eggs or foraging on the flowers. Again, honeybees and other native bees as well love basil flowers. This is a basil flower. This is an allium, and this is a pipevine swallowtail caterpillar on dill. So we can grow a lot of things that we can use, but that wildlife can use as well. So that's kind of what I had. I just wanted to give an overview of some options of different ways we can put botany to use in our landscapes, and understanding those things of about what a plant needs to grow and how it grows will make us or help us make really good decisions in the landscape, right? If we know what kind of a soil a plant needs to be successful, we can either make sure we have those things available or choose a different plant that fits well with our soil. If we know how much sunlight it needs, we know when to provide shade or what side of our house to plant it on. And so, if I had another 2 hours, we would go through some of those things in specific. But this is hopefully a starting point where we can look into maybe some more of the needs of our plants and some more of the things that make us successful in the landscape. So here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk to plant people and answer questions. I have a couple of podcasts, and for better or worse, my face is all over social media. I'm Planthropology or the Plant Prof in a lot of places, but I know I went over time a little bit, but if anyone has a couple of questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions?
I'm looking for In the Grow podcast, but it's not coming up in my
Oh, yeah.
podcast favorite.
Is your In the Grow, is that pretty much local, or is there a way to access that?
No, we should have, it should be available on most podcast players unless it is not doing that right now. Hold on. Let me see if it comes up on my phone.
Okay.
Because we have had issues with that in the past.
He's being very modest, but like his podcasts are fantastic. I highly recommend for anybody who's interested in botany. Planthropology has gotten me through a lot of road trips and just daily chores and like everything else. It's a super interesting podcast to listen to and funny.
Well, thank you. So In the Grow is with my co-host name is Rachel Boyd, so it's listed under her name. So if you search for In the Grow with Rachel Boyd, it should come up. The logo is a picture of a sunflower.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Perfect. That worked. Any other questions? So do you think when you're talking about introducing, some of these non-native species that are multi-purpose, a lot of these aren't the highly invasive ones that we see that are introduced for purely the aesthetic reasons. Do you think that there's kind of a trend there that these less destructive plants tend to be more multi-purpose?
I think so for sure. And, I look at stuff like that a lot and realize that, we don't know what we don't know a lot of times. And so when we introduce plants sometimes, either as an aesthetic plant or maybe for a biological reason, like kudzu or something like that, it's not necessarily malicious. And I think sometimes that it gets taken that way. But yeah, like a fruiting pear is going to be way less invasive than a Bradford pear because so much more goes into the production of each fruit from the plant standpoint that it's not going to create this enormous, huge seed set that crosses out readily with other plants and does all these other things like a Bradford pear might. And I think that if we start thinking about that using maybe even if we find varieties that are better suited to a region, that can a lot of times reduce the amount of like invasive potential, or also reduce the amount of resources we have to spend like per plant. So yeah, I think in the industry for sure, a lot of the breeding work is going into making plants that are, one, less invasive, that have less potential of becoming invasive, but also that are more productive.
Okay, and that actually brings into part of our last lecture, which is energy allocation and how plants kind of, or how any organism has a limited set of energy, right? And so it chooses what it allocates that energy to. And that was an awesome point about, when it produces that fruit, it has less towards that invasive potential that we see with a lot of our invasive plants here. So very cool. Any other questions? Last call? Okay, well, thank you so much, Vikram. This was amazing. We really appreciated you doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. I was happy to do it, and anytime.
Cool. Okay, we'll let you go. Thank you.
Thanks. You have a great night.
Awesome. Okay, so let's take a break for a few minutes, and then I will switch to what we're doing next, which is a very brief overview of how you can learn more about the insects and plants here in Montana. So let me just get that up. Okay, perfect. So, basically, I want to go over some of the resources that we have so that when you're out exploring Missoula and Montana and wherever you end up, you have some resources to kind of help guide. Because I think one of the biggest challenges with botany and bugs is identifying what you're looking at. I still have a lot of trouble with botany and plant ID personally. I'm getting better with spider identification, and we're working towards the rest of the bugs. For spiders in particular, I highly recommend this book right here. I've gotten a ton of use out of this. It's really well organized. It's here at the library if you need it. And I'm going to have a little activity towards the end where you can kind of ID a couple spiders that I've taken pictures of using this. But just to start with iNaturalist, this is the iNaturalist observations just for Missoula. And this is an app that you can download on your phone, but you can also use it on the desktop. And you make an account and you can upload pictures of what you're seeing in nature. And then some really nerdy people, such as myself, will go through and help you ID what you're looking at. iNaturalist partners with Seek, which uses an AI to detect what you're looking at. And usually it's pretty accurate. Sometimes it can't quite get it, especially when it comes to bugs and some sort of trees, especially if there's not, flowers or, it's not at a certain stage to help it identify. And so that's when the community of iNaturalist really comes in handy. But as you can see, you can go through and see what people are seeing around you. It can go down to your exact neighborhood. You can keep it at the Missoula level. But as you can tell, some people are doing some pretty cool moth catching just through these pictures here. We have some beautiful butterflies, a lot more moths. The birds have infiltrated. If you're really into birds, I suggest checking out eBird. That's going to be your #1 source for what birds are in your community at any given time. Usually real time because birders seem to not have jobs. I'm sure they do have jobs, but I don't know how they get these rare species all the time. I'll get the alert and it's like 2 p.m. on a Tuesday and they're already out there. You'll show up at 5 after work and they've been there for hours. But this is an example of how you can use it for plants, right? And one of my favorite activities to do, and especially when you're new to exploring botany and your community on a botany level, is to just go out with Seek and start identifying plants that catch your eye, and even the ones that don't catch your eye, just the ones that are closest to you. And take a little walk either down your street or in any of the green spaces that we have here. which we have a lot of, and start noticing what is native and what isn't. And just by becoming aware of what species we have and what role they play in our community, whether that's a role that they've had historically, meaning that they're native versus introduced versus invasive, all of those have different levels of impact and all of them have different places in our community. Even the invasives, there's a reason that they've stayed here, and it's because they've found their niche and they have found a way to exploit it better than any other plant here in our native ecosystem. And once you start getting into more of this and seeing more of these, types of species, these types of locations, being more aware of what's around you, you're going to see less of what is called green blindness, which is you see green and it's plants. And that's as far as you go. And I'm guilty of doing this all the time. I look out and I see plants. It's plants, they're all green, very nice. But there's so much diversity to greenery, not even getting into flowering plants, not even getting into fruiting plants. Just the greenery can be incredibly diverse without us noticing. And so going in there, either going old-fashioned with, a book that we can borrow from the library right here, or going with your Seek ID app, and just figuring out what species are around you is going to make a big impact on kind of connecting yourself to your ecosystem, to the community. And that's the goal of this program, is to make you more aware of what's around you, so that in turn, you have this education, you have this awareness, and hopefully this drive to go out and then share those findings with people, right? We want you to go and share this awareness, this, new awareness of a depth to greenery, a depth to botany, a depth to the interactions that you see. And share that with your community members, and, each person you share that with, they get connected to what's around them as well. And I think that really is what it comes down to, especially when we deal with conservation issues, is how connected people are to what's around them. Oh, dead deer. We see a lot of those, unfortunately. It's how connected they are and how invested they are. And it's not, I think one of the problems that we get into with conservation is assuming that people don't care about an issue because they haven't done anything, when a lot of the times people aren't aware of the issue. For example, we hear Save the Bees, and that's a campaign that has gone to, help our native pollinators. But a lot of the times people will hear that and understand it as, we need more honeybees. And honeybees are actually a non-native species for the most part. A lot of them are European honeybees that are used as basically livestock. They're part of our agriculture. And so when we create these hives in our front yard thinking that we're helping save the bees, we're actually creating a competitive force for our local pollinators. And so becoming more aware of the different ecosystems, the different interactions, and how things are different, that there's more depth than just, this is a bee. There are many types of bees. What type of bee are we talking about? That can really help create a stronger community. Love that this guy is out here with all the moths. I love when you find one guy and it's all the same. Oh, I love this. Okay, we needed to have him come in and talk about bugs. All these are his. So as you can see, Missoula has a ton of bug diversity. You can walk outside right now and find 5 different bugs. You just have to start looking for them. And I think I'm going to speak especially to spiders because I used to be incredibly arachnophobic. The 2 people who are going to see all the spiders are the people who really love spiders and are actively looking for them, and the arachnophobics who want nothing to do with them. And personally, the one thing that really helped me get over my fear of spiders is, I always realized at an intellectual level that they were helpful for the community, and I didn't want to kill them, but I was also terrified to enter my own kitchen if they were in there. So it was an unsustainable relationship. But understanding more about them and wanting to identify them has really helped me, because even if I still get moments where I'm scared of them, I really want to know what type of spider that is so that I can log it on iNaturalist and get another spider badge. So it's become like an adult Pokemon for me. Got to catch them all, and for spiders, that's the solution there for me. And so I just hope that this, this class and this series, all of which are available on YouTube through the Missoula Public Library YouTube page, I hope that it kind of encourages you to find where you fit in the community and what your interest is, and just build on that. There are people in this community that will help you. I'm happy to connect you with them if you have an interest that you want to expand on. And just become an advocate for your community so that we have all of these things preserved and more people are becoming aware of what's around them. Like our little house sparrow, which is native or invasive? Invasive. And our bald eagle, which is a native, but it is also a what type of kleptoparasite? Opportunistic kleptoparasite. So it opportunistically steals meals from other animals, oftentimes ospreys. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up. I have two spiders that I would like you guys to work on IDing as a group. This little guy and this little guy. So I'm going to grab the two pictures so you can see them at one time. Oh, that would be nice to have on a daily basis. Honestly, most of the problems with IDing bugs is that you just can't see them clearly enough. I have microscopes that I brought, or microscopes. I do have a microscope at home. Surprisingly cheap. If you enjoy looking at tiny things, I would make the investment. But, magnifying glasses, especially for kids, like you can buy them for like $5 and they work just as well for adults as they do for kids. Oftentimes they're a little sturdier too, which is helpful when you're in the creek. So, any of you want to come up, grab this book, and work on identifying these two? You can also, so between this book and either Seek or using just your phone looking up native spiders in Montana, you will be able to identify these two. The left one is going to be a little bit of a trick one, but you can get it, I'm sure. So give that a try, just in the few minutes that we have left, and then we'll also end this class by awarding our certificates for the people who managed to make it through all of my talking.